My name is Jacques Guy Benhamou. I don't know where it comes from. My forebears were called Benhamou too. They lived in Bedeau, that is in Morocco. We've tried to know the origin of this word, this name, Benhamou, but we couldn't find out a proper answer. My Hebrew name is Yaakov. That's the the name of my grandfather, and it's the tradition in our family that the eldest son bears the name of his grandfather, that is, his father's father. My grandfather was a cobbler. He was born in Nedroma, that is a small village not very far from the Moroccan border. Was born there in 1874. He lived in Marnia, Lalla Marnia, which is a small place, a small town near the Moroccan border. He married my grandmother, whose name was Mesauda Benayoun. She too was born in Nedroma, and from a family coming from Namur. All those places are very near the Moroccan border. Because my forebears came from Bedeau. Bedeau is, as I told you, is a place, a small town on the road from Timbuktu to the Mediterranean Sea. And it's a place where lots of Jews, there were about 13 Jewish families. Most of them were peddlers who provided food and all sorts of things to the people coming in those caravans going to Onain, a small port on the seaside. I'll go back to my grandfather and grandmother. They got married in Marnia, the place I mentioned before, and their first child was my father, Ephraim Enkaoua, Abraham Albert Benhamou, because we had in Algeria, we all had Hebrew names, but those names were translated, so to speak, into French. There was sort of a correspondence between Hebrew and French names. For instance, my own name, Jacob, was translated into Jacques, and my father's name, Abraham, was translated into Albert. And then my father was born in Marnia in 1898. He went to the French school. Apparently he was quite a brilliant pupil, but at the age of 12 he left school to earn his living. And he, the first job he had was in a cafe. He was a waiter in the cafe. At the age of 18, remember, he was born in 1898. At the age of 18, that is in 1916, he was enlisted in the army and sent to the front immediately. There, he was wounded, and at the end of the war, he was offered a job in the administration of a railway company. I believe that the whole family followed him when he was appointed to a job he got in the railway company. He was sent to Rolizane, which is a town in the an Algerian town. How could I locate it? It's not very far from the sea, not very far from Arzeu, Mostaganem. On the outskirts of the plain of Chelif, la plaine du Chelif, which was renowned in Algeria because it was a place where they grew fruit, vegetables, very fertile plain. Then in 1928, no, before, I think was 1924, he got married, but unfortunately, and he had, the couple had a child named René Samuel. Unfortunately, my father's wife died 1 year after the baby was born. So 3 years later, my father met my mother and they got married in 1928. I was their firstborn. Was born in 1929. Shall I show the...
We're going to do that after.
After? Okay. And so I was born in 1929. At that time, my parents were living in Algiers, where my father worked. But my mother insisted on having her baby in her own home in Tlemcen, and this is why I was born in Tlemcen. From Algiers, my father was moved to Sidi Bel Abbès. In fact, Algiers is quite far from Tlemcen, and my mother wanted to be as near as possible to Tlemcen. So in 1931 or 32, no, 31, my parents moved to Sidi Bel Abbès, which is only about 50 miles from Tlemcen. And there my second brother was born. My second brother was born there in 1932. And from Sidi Bel Abbès, my father moved to a place much nearer to Tlemcen, that is Ain Feza. Ain Feza is a small village 8-9 miles from Tlemcen. My father was a station master there, and we lived in Ain Feza until his death in 1938. In the meantime, my brother Paul was born in 1935 there. So when my father died, aged 40, in 1938, we immediately moved to Tlemcen, and we stayed in my grandparents' house there.
Your father died when you were young.
Yeah.
So what kind of impact did that have on you as the eldest sibling?
Well, it was a terrible shock. We didn't realize we were too young. I was 9, my brothers were 6 and 3. I just remember that after the funeral, my younger brother, George, asked me, Father isn't going to come back? See, he didn't realize that he was gone for good. And we stayed there in my grandmother's house for about a year. Yes, less than a year. And fortunately, we found an apartment just in the building, in the house just opposite my grandmother's. And that's where we stayed from 1939 to to exile from Algeria.
Do you have any...
Pardon? As far as I'm concerned, I lived in that house from 1939 to 1954 when I got married.
Can you describe your family life in Tlemcen?
Yeah.
And
the whole impression I have of that time is a very deep sadness all around us. In fact, my grandmother, I don't remember exactly what age she had at that time, but she was almost blind. And she always stayed at home. She never went out except for a visit to the hammam or things like that. She lived with 1, 2, 3 of my aunts. There was no male member in this family at that time. My uncles were married, apart from the youngest one, and the youngest one was not, well, he didn't stay very long in Tlemcen after the death of my father. He had been very ill in 1937, 2 years before, 1 year before, very, very ill, nearly died at that time, so that he interrupted his studies, his schooling. And at the beginning of when it was 2 or 3 months before the break of World War II, he went into the army. He became a soldier there. He volunteered in the army. At that time, I think he was exactly 20 years old. So this is the impression of I still have when thinking of that terrible period when we left the village of Ain Feza to come to Tlemcen. And it was just a few months before the breaking of the war.
Before the breaking
of World War II. The war broke out in September 1939, 1st to 2nd September 1939. And we had moved from Ain Feza on the 4th of December 1938. See, so it's very... for me, myself, it was a terrible change. In Ain Feza, which was a small village, there was only one class. The school was... in the school there were about 15, 20 pupils. When I arrived in Tlemcen, it was quite different. I went to a school which was called École Jules Ferry, and in my form I think we were 30, 35 pupils only in my form. And it was a very great change, because in the small village, I remember I had 2 or 3 friends. One of them was an Arab. I remember his name, his first name. He was called Mnouar, which means the flower. Was very kind. And the other friend was Corsican. Well, his parents were Corsican, came from Corsica. And I remember his name too, he was called François. We were in very good terms. When I arrived in December 1938 in that school, things were much different. In those days, boys wore a cap, a beret, black beret, a beret. And when we went out of school at 11, yes, in the morning, we had school from 8 to 11, and then in the afternoon from 1:30 to 4 or 5, remember. In that school, École Jules Ferry, was down a slope, and just after that school there was a school which was dedicated to Arab pupils. And we all went out of school at the same time. I still remember that because I was impressed by that. The Arabs, going out of their school, rushed past us and they robbed us of our beret. I was amazed. What's happening? Why do they take our beret? It was just like that. Fortunately, in the street where we lived, Rue des Écoles, I had a good friend, was called Benhamou too. He told me, we're not going to take that way, because it's just bordering the Arab quarter. We're going to just leave the school, turn left, perhaps a little bit longer, but we'll be quiet. We won't have the Arabs behind us. That was my first encounter with anti-Semitism.
Can you describe a little bit the other differences that you had in Feza? About, was there a Jewish communal life? Was there a Jewish school? Any sort of organizations like that before? And did that change dramatically when you went to Tlemcen?
Well, I've just said that it was the first time I encounter anti-Semitism. It's not exactly the first time. Because while I was in Ain Feza, I told you I had 2 or 3 friends. One of them was called Kosher. Nothing to do with the Jewish people. It was named Kosher. It's amazing. And his parents had a bar, a cafe. And we used to play in the bar. And in 1935-36, I was 7 years old. We played in the bar. I don't know what we were doing exactly. And it was the time where there was the elections, the vote, the time of the Front Populaire. And of course, as it's usual in all the cafes in France, people were talking about the future mayor, the election, are you going to vote for this one or for that one, etc. We didn't pay any attention. We were there, and the men talking round the counter, drinking their pastis, and one of them started singing a song I still remember. Rien qu'à la forme de ton péton, on voit bien que tu es un sale youpin, Monsieur Ben-Zaken. Monsieur Ben-Zaken was candidate for the election, and the song I've just sung means simply by the form of your meaning your penis, I understand you're a dirty Jew, Monsieur Ben-Zaken. When that man started singing that song, my friend's mother, who was behind the counter, said, "Quiet, quiet, look, there's the child over there." The child, that was me, meaning there's a Jewish child behind you. That was my first encounter with anti-Semitism. And the second was in Tlemcen when they stole our beret, when we had a ball to play with. Generally it was a ball made with stuff, you see, bits of all sort of stuff. We put them together and made a ball. They robbed it from us. When we played in the street, when we played ball or anything, if we had any toy with us, even a small, you know, those rickety slides that children use to go down slopes, etc. They passed there running and they robbed us of that. Okay, that was that. What was your next question?
Those are some negative, associations with Jewish life. But Were there any positive associations? Do you remember holidays in Fiza or communal life?
Well,
that you thought-
in Fiza, we were the only Jewish family. See, it was a very small village. We had there were no other Jew there. We had to order. My father wanted to eat kosher, and we had to order the meat, for instance, from Tlemcen, and they sent us by the train. By train, they sent us what we asked for. I remember when Paul was born in 1935, we had a family meeting. People coming from Marnia. My father had a cousin who was a good friend of his, and who was the, comment est-ce qu'on dit ça, le parrain, the one who holds the baby.
Godfather?
For Mila.
No,
I don't
I
know.
don't know the name.
I know what you mean. I don't know the name.
Mhm.
The parrain.
The?
We'll go with parrain en français, c'est très bien.
Oui, c'est le parrain. En français, on disait le parrain. I don't remember the name, the English name for that. Well, in fact, his cousin, who had exactly the same name, he was too Albert Abraham Benhamou, but he came from another from my grandfather's brother. My grandfather had two brothers, one whose name was Moshe, that is Moses, and who was the eldest. My grandfather was the second one, Yaakov, and there was a third one. I have never been able to find any information about him, except that he was he sold vegetables at the market, and he had two daughters, and we think that the two daughters lived in France during the war, and they probably were sent to Auschwitz or another concentration camp, and they disappeared there. Right, so when Paul was born, for his Milah, his birth, we had a family meeting, and the rabbi from Tlemcen came down to Infeza to slaughter a calf. We had that ceremony, and it's one of my remembrances of Infeza. You asked me about my father, what I remember from my father. I remember his uniform, because he had the uniform of a station master with a special cap, and Tlemcen being Infeza being just a few miles from Tlemcen, there were often people who smuggled the goods from Morocco to Algeria, and instead of leaving the train at Tlemcen, where there were policemen or customs, they used to leave the train with their goods a few miles after Tlemcen, that is Infeza. And I remember once, it was in the evening, my father caught one of them, not one of them, a group of them. and they tried to flee. And he went into his office where he had a gun, and he pursued them with a gun. So I was frightened to see my father going. That's one of my remembrances. Another one is that I've always liked taking walks in nature and pick flowers, and sometimes I found birds' eggs. And once I found a nest with small birds, and I brought them back to our house. Our house was the station, in fact, that was the railway. And God, my father was angry. Why did you do that? Don't you think they have the right to live? You're going to take them back to where you found them. That's what another souvenir of my father. And the last thing I have as a souvenir. Is that all right?
His head, all I see right now is really his profile.
Avec la lumière, ça fait qu'il y a the shadows that come. It's important that you keep eye contact with me.
Mm-hmm. He had a beautiful handwriting, really beautiful handwriting. And I've kept his signature, beautiful signature, and that's why the mayor of that small village asked him to register the birth and death of that small community.
What did he know about Tlemcen before you moved there?
Well, as I said before, my mother was always homesick when she was out of Tlemcen, and whenever she could, she took the train and went back to her mother's house. And we very often spent the Jewish holidays in Tlemcen. That's.
Do you remember the holidays?
Pardon?
Do you remember those holidays? What they were like?
No, I don't remember. On the other hand, I remember a holiday we spent in Marnia, the birthplace of my father, where his cousin, the cousin I mentioned just before, where his cousin lived. And I remember the synagogue in Marnia, where we, I suppose it was for Yom Kippur. Yes, because we went to the synagogue, and I remember the synagogue there. Well, as I told you, in Marnia, every 2 houses you have a Benhamou. Lots of Benhamous migrated there from Bedeau to. Mm-hmm.
Tell me more.
Do you want me to speak about that?
Yeah.
Well, I know very little, except that I gathered that later on when I met other people coming from Marnia, and they were named Benhamou too. And I said, well, how is that? What I learned from Bedeau comes from an article, very long article, written by not a clergyman. He's called Abbé. I don't remember exactly his name, but he was an abbé. And he mentioned in this article that in Bedeau, which is that place situated south of, not very far from the Algerian border, south of Taza, and Taza is north of Morocco, north east of Morocco, about 40, 50 miles from the sea. So in Bedeau, there were at least 12 families, 12 Jewish families, and a Jewish family included several other families bearing the same name, but belonging to the same group. Each family had its own synagogue. They called Shnora. And among those families, those 12 great families, there were first the Cohen-Scali family, the Ben-Susan family, the Benhamou family, and others. But among them, there were those three big families. And I know that my forebears lived there, came from Bedeau. They emigrated to Algeria after the conquest of Algeria by the French in 1830. All those people living in Bedeau had very few jobs. They couldn't earn a decent living, so that when the French arrived, they tried to find something else. And they crossed over the border. Some stayed immediately after the border. The first place is Lalla Marnia in Arabic, and in French we called it Marnia. I just mentioned, by the way, that the first president of the Algerian Republic, Ben Bella, was born too in Marnia. But as I said, there were quite a number of Benhamous. You know how immigrants work generally. There's a cousin who's immigrated. He writes to his people left at home, I'm staying here, it's nice, we have jobs, we have food, etc., etc. Why don't you come? So they tried their luck, and they crossed over the border and came to Marnia. That's how it went. And some of them, instead of staying at Marnia, they went to the big city of the region, that is Tlemcen. And that's what my Janine's great-grandfather, Abraham Cohen, moved directly from Bedeau to Tlemcen. He stayed in Tlemcen for a few years, and then his eldest son, moved to Sebdou, which is not to be confounded with Bedeau. And that's where my Janine's father was born, in Sebdou.
So take me to Tlemcen, and now we're in Tlemcen.
Okay.
And describe to me a little bit about school life and communal life, les éclaireurs, tout ça.
Mm-hmm.
What was life like growing up in Tlemcen once you were there?
Okay.
And a little bit about I know the Jewish community was in the main road. Can you describe a little bit what the communal life was like in Tlemcen?
Right. I mentioned that when we moved to Tlemcen, we first stayed in my grandmother's house, And then a few months later, we moved to another house, which was just on the other side of the street. And that street was called Rue des Écoles. Rue des Écoles. It was called Rue des Écoles because at the bottom of that street, there was the high school. Tlemcen High School was just situated at the bottom of the street. My grandmother lived in number 1, we lived in number 2, and the street was down below at number 8 or number 10, something like that. That street, I mentioned that street because we were not the only Jewish people there. All the street, all the houses in that street were owned by Jewish people and by occupied, yes, all along that street, the houses were inhabited by Jewish people. For instance, in my grandmother's house, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Jewish families. It was not a big house, 1 story only. In our house, opposite, 2 stories, there were 11 Jewish families. So it was just an extension of the Jewish quarter. Between the Jewish quarter and our street, there was a square, a big square. So that I can say that the Rue des Écoles was just an extension of the Jewish quarter. There was in our street 1 or 2 businesses owned by Christians, but most of the people living there were Jewish.
How big was the Jewish community, and how big was that as proportion to the broader Tlemcenian?
Yeah. In 1941, the Vichy government, made, how will we call that, recensement. Can't tell you.
Census?
Eh?
Census?
No. They tried to number to figure out the number of Jewish people because well, I'm going to.
We'll get to World War II in a second. Let's stay with just the communal life first.
Communal. Well, I can give you the exact number of Jewish people in 1941. It was 5,202. 5,202 for a total population of about 100 people. 60,000 people. 60,000 people. Among those 60,000 people, about 5,000 Jewish people, about 25 non-Jewish, European, let's say European people, and the rest Arabs. Right.
Was your school a Jewish school?
No, our school was not a Jewish school at all. No. The Jewish kids attended public schools, non-Jewish schools. There were about 5 or 6 of them, 2 big schools for boys, École Jules Ferry, where I went. By the way, Jules Ferry was a French Minister of Education in the 19th century. École du Faux, 2. There were 2 girls' schools. Yes, that's all. Four schools. Now, apart from that, for Jewish kids, there was the Talmud Torah. My poor mother, had lots of things to think of, apart from sending me to the Talmud Torah, but still, I think I was about 11 when she told me, you must go to the Talmud Torah. I went there.
Okay,
So I don't think that my mother asked me to go to the Talmud Torah spontaneously. She probably had one of her neighbors, or perhaps my grandmother, had told her he should go to the Talmud Torah. Still, I went once, but it was such a terrible mess. The Talmud Torah took place in a synagogue, the place where usually the ladies sit, you see, during the prayers, during the services, the place which was generally upstairs. And it was a sort of very long corridor with pupils of different ages, and the rabbi, who was the director of that Talmud Torah, a small chap, very, very, very nice, but very strict too. But well, he had a hell of a job with about 40 kids shouting, very, very, very noisy. And I was amazed. Remember, I was just came from that small school where everything was quiet. We had very very good relationship with the mistress, and I was amazed to see that atmosphere. So when I came back from the Talmud Torah, I said to my mother, I won't go back there. It's terrible. It's a hell of a place. No, I'm not going back. So when came the moment when I had to study, to learn Hebrew, to have my bar mitzvah, that was 2 years later, well, I simply went to a rabbi who was one of our neighbors. He already had a big family, several children, and he received me in his dining room, teaching me Hebrew while his kids were running about. And that's how I learned my little Hebrew, the small Hebrew I know. And I never went back to the Talmud Torah. And I'm very sorry for that, because I didn't know about that. There was no male in as I said, in our family. There were only women, and that was not one of their preoccupations, so that nobody urged me to do this or that. The only thing I remember is that for my bar mitzvah, my mother wanted me to go by myself. She didn't want anybody to support me, to be with me. Since he has not the luck of having his father, I'm sorry. He's got to go alone, and that's what I did. On a Thursday, I think it was a Thursday, I went there for the morning, the Shaharit office, 6 o'clock in the morning. I said the bracha, and I went back to home, and that was it. And on the following Shabbat, I was called to the Torah too. I reread the bracha, and that was it. And it was the same for my brothers. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Where did the inspiration come from?
What?
To do the bar mitzvah?
I don't know, probably because I told you that in our house there were 11 Jewish families, and among them there were kids the same age, you see, and they had their bar mitzvah, and so I was probably to do the same as the others. That was all. I'm not sure. Yes, I want to mention something which is quite important for the Jewish community in Tlemcen. Most of the, not most, but all the rabbis we had in Tlemcen, it was probably the same in other cities, were probably good in Talmud and Jewish law, etc. But their everyday language was Arabic, Judeo-Arabic. They didn't understand French. Even if they understood French, they didn't speak it very well. So in 1934 or 35, arrived in Tlemcen a real rabbi, a real Talmudist, coming from Central Europe. I don't remember if it was Hungary or Czechoslovakia. He was called Hadas Lebel, Israel Hadas Lebel. We called him Ashel, because Hadas, H-A-D-D-A-S, Lebel, L-E-B-E-L, Ash-L, H-L, to make it short, Hadas Lebel. He was a real Talmudist, and he was a real teacher. He knew how to teach. He had the knack for teaching. And this is where I should have gone. I should have gone to the Talmud Torah. In fact, I got in touch with him because he renovated the Talmud Torah in Tlemcen. He asked me to come and see him before I had my bar mitzvah, even if my bar mitzvah was as short as it can be. He asked me in his office. I went to his office. He asked me a few questions to see if I knew a few things about our religion. And he said, all right, I won't give you the diploma, before you promise me for the following year to go every morning to the Sharit office. And I obeyed him. I've always been very obedient. And I went all the year round to the Sharit office, but he never gave me my diploma. I resent it very much. No, but in fact he was a very good professor, teacher, and in my book I have a few pages about him, because he renewed among the Jewish young people and deep interest in the Jewish religion, in the Jewish language, etc. He organized the Talmud Torah exactly as the other schools, the public schools, were organized, with prizes for this one or that one, competitions, etc. Right. Unfortunately, he left Tlemcen for Algiers, I think was in 1949 or 1950. His children were born in Tlemcen, and his, I think it's his eldest child, Raphael Adaslaben, is brilliant. He was the president of the Channel 2, and he's in Conseil d'État. He has a very brilliant career. He got married when he arrived in Tlemcen with a lady coming from the same country. I said Czechoslovakia perhaps, and she was very good too. I have a picture of her in our book, in my book.
Can I ask you, you mentioned the old rabbis spoke mostly Judeo-Arabic. Did he speak French? And were most of your courses conducted when you were studying for Bar Mitzvah? Was this in French?
As I remember, the services in Tlemcen, I used to be very faithful. I used to go there every Friday night, even after my bar mitzvah, long after my bar mitzvah. And there was absolutely no commentary of the parasha, neither in French or in any other language. They used to read and to be very particular about the reading of the parasha. If you mention, if the tone was not precise, immediately there was a protest from the whole community, the whole congregation there. But it was not interesting at all. We went there to hear the songs we liked. The Kaddish in the Friday night was something sumptuous.
Do you remember any tunes?
Pardon?
Do you remember any tunes?
On the spur of the moment, no. But
Chadodi and Keoenu?
Lechadodi is exactly the same as it is sung in the same way as it was in Morocco. Lechadodi, legratka. I'm not very good at this. I want to go back to the Jewish community, because apart from the Talmud Torah, I said that it was very well organized. First, we had a board of directors, that is the consistoire, And we must pay homage to those people, because I didn't mention at the beginning, I should have. I lived in Tlemcen from 1938, when my father died, to 1954, when I got married. In the meantime, I spent 1 year in England. I spent 3 years in Toulouse. So, you see, it's not a very long period of time. But in that period of time, it's to pay an homage to the members of the consistorial board. They built a big synagogue, la grande synagogue de la rue Durable. They renovated the gardens, the park of Ephraim Enkaoua, where the Ephraim Enkaoua is buried, le tombeau durable. And they rebuilt the synagogue of Haberim, the synagogue of the Hebra Kadisha, which was inaugurated in 1955, just 6 years before the exile, before the independence. So they've done quite a lot. Well, apart from that, apart from the building of synagogues and the park of Enkaoua's grave, they had a lot of Jewish associations. There was first an association which was called Mohara Betolot. That is an association which aimed at helping girls to have everything that was needed for their wedding. There was an association which was called La Mide-Pain. La Mide-Pain, that is an association for helping the poor, giving them money for the different festivals, for the Shabbat, etc., etc. There was, of course, there were the other Jewish associations like Bedeau and things like that. I think I forgot one. Well, in fact, it was a community which was very active, very responsible. I forgot one of the main things, that the organization of the pilgrimage at the which we call the Hilula of Rabbi Ephraim Enkaoua. It was the peak of the season. See, that pilgrimage takes place at the Lag BaOmer. Just at Lag BaOmer, there was a full week of festivities. We received the pilgrims in the big synagogue of La Synagogue du Rabbin, where they had lots of speeches, songs, lighting of candles, etc., etc., and also the organization of concerts, generally Judeo-Arab music, the organization of dances, balls, and apart from the associations more or less related to the consistorial board, there were also Jewish specific associations like La Fraternelle. La Fraternelle, which was at the origin a gymnastic association for athletes, for young people who were taught all sorts of games, exercises, music too, because they had a big orchestra with trumpets, drums, etc. You've had information about that, I suppose. No.
I want to go back to Enkaoua.
Yeah.
Heard a lot about Enkaoua. The audience doesn't know who Enkaoua is. What are people celebrating? Who is Enkaoua, and what is this pilgrimage for? Where are people coming from? And can you describe this pilgrimage? I also want to touch the Jews and Arabs mixing a little bit too.
Well, Enkaoua was a rabbi coming from Toledo in Spain. He escaped the pogroms of 1392 because a century before the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, there were pogroms against the Jews in some places, in some parts of Spain, namely in Toledo, the place where Ephraim Enkaoua was born. He was born in the family of a rabbi, and then to escape from those pogroms, he went to Morocco first. He stayed in a few months in Morocco. I think even he went to Marrakesh. And then he moved to Tlemcen. At that time, the Jews lived out of the limits of the city, out of the ramparts of the city, in a small place called Agadir. And he was a rabbi, but just as was usual with the rabbis of that time, they had many other possibilities. They were medical doctors as well. They made the miracles too. So this Ephraim Enkaoua was helped the governor of the city of Tlemcen, I don't remember his name, had a daughter who was very ill and nobody could cure her. And finally he asked Ephraim Enkaoua to see his daughter and to try and cure her. And he did it. He managed to cure her. So, of course, the governor of Tlemcen was a prince, was very pleased, and he said to Ephraim Enkaoua, "Ask me whatever you like." And he said, "I don't ask anything for me. I just ask you permission to have my people coming in protection, in your protection, near the Meshwar." The Meshwar was the place, sort of castle where the prince lived. And the prince said, oh, no problem. You come with your family, with your people, and you stay just at the foot of my castle. And so they did, and that's where the Jewish quarter was settled there, near the Mishwar. Well, there's a legend saying that when Ephraim Enkaoua arrived near Tlemcen, he rode a lion, and the reins were a serpent. And this is how we present the arrival of Ephraim Enkaoua in Tlemcen. Of course, this is a legend, but legends are there to try and persuade the people to to accept the law. And then to commemorate the death of Ephraim Enkaoua, it became a habit to celebrate that day at Lag BaOmer, the day when he died. I don't remember exactly. It was in the month Kislev. It corresponds to Lag BaOmer. And people swarmed from all over North Africa to Tlemcen to gain the protection of Ephraim Enkaoua. And during a whole week, there were ceremonies, and the peak of the ceremony was, of course, the pilgrimage over the grave of Ephraim Enkaoua. People kneel down near the grave and kiss the grave. Before kissing it, they pour water on sugar so that their prayer becomes mild, as sweet as sugar. And they light candles. There's a very mystic atmosphere. People ask the saint to protect them, to look after them, and after saying their prayers, they walk back without turning their back to the tomb. See, they just walk back and go out of the precincts of the grave, and after that they generally have a picnic, because near the grave there's a spring. This is the spring here, the spring, and they have a picnic in the gardens. Usually there are lots of musicians playing Judeo-Arab music, and some people dance, etc., etc. And in town there's always a great ball, because it's a special occasion where young people can meet. Jewish girls meet Jewish boys, and very often there are weddings just after. It's a way of encouraging young people to meet, and it's a very special atmosphere. And of course, all around this, people buy pictures, postcards, they buy rings. There are special rings, bracelets, and all the rest. Right.
I just want to touch on one other thing and move on here, but this pilgrimage, as I've heard it, there's an Arab pilgrimage as well. The Arabs revered Enkaoua as well. Was there Muslim communities who came, or did Muslims come to the event as well? Or was it
I can't tell you. I don't remember. I have been at least twice the pilgrimage. Yes, but I know that some Arab women, particularly, went now and again to pray. But I've never seen one myself. But during the pilgrimage, I doubt it. I don't think. I've mentioned that, by the way, near Marnia, there was a pilgrimage in the grave of a saint called Sidi Yaqub. But Yaqub, we don't know if he was a Jewish saint or an Arab saint. And in fact, both Jewish people and Arab people went to a pilgrimage there. That was near Marnia and Sidi Yaqub. But as regards Ephraim Enkaoua, I don't think there was any participation of Arab people.
I want to move along then, and it sounds like there was a very active Jewish community, and you were very aware of it. But did you still have a French identity, and how did that? I want to move towards the World War II period soon, but can you describe your identity as a Jew, as a Frenchman, as an Algerian? How did you feel?
Well, I'll tell you something first. I think in Tlemcen there were quite a number of families who did all they could to be as like the Christians as possible. They were Jewish. Everybody knew that they were Jewish, and they themselves said that they were Jewish. But in their manners, their way of living, etc., in the way they spoke too, they wanted to be as near the French as possible. And of course, this entails that they avoided as far as they could to be confounded with the other Jews.
Did you yourself feel French or Jewish?
No. As I told you, I lived in a house where everybody was Jewish. At school, all my comrades were Jewish. We had a place, I want to mention this because nobody else will do. There was a library which was called the Jeunesse Littéraire, which was founded in the early 20s by Jewish students. One of them will become a barrister later on. He was called Marcel Gauzy. And there were other young people, Jewish people, going to the high school, and some of them went later on to the university. they gathered together. Most of them were Jewish, not all of them. At the beginning, not all of them were Jewish, but very soon they were prominent, the Jewish members were prominent in that group. And I myself, in the 1940s, I went to that library, which was just next door to our place. You see, as I told you, I lived in Rue des Écoles, and a few yards from our place, you just turned left and you had this Jeunesse littéraire. It was a library where, at that time, I've got to mention this. When my father died, we were extremely poor. My mother received as a pension from the employees of my father, the railway company, something like 200 euros a month for the four of us. As you know, in those days, girls didn't work. Young girls didn't work because they were supposed to be good housewives and stay at home, etc., and not to have temptations outside the house. So my mother had gone to high school, but she left high school at the age of 15, 16, you see, and then stayed at home. And she had absolutely no means of earning her living. Well, my father being in touch, when he lived, being in touch with the mayor of the of the village, and you can see here in this picture a banquet which took place in Ain Feza, with all the mayor is here, and his assistants, and all the people who had contributed to the election of the mayor. And my father was one of them, you see. But when he died, everybody promised, we're going to take care of you, we're going to see this or that. And in the end, nothing at all. Nothing at all. So that, remember, it was 1938, just before the war. My mother, who had no specialty, what we did, she sewed buttons on the trousers of soldiers, you see. And we were paid very little money. In those days, there were no copy machine, and the next door to our house there was a notaire. I don't know what you call a notaire. So a lawyer who registers all the contracts between people. When you buy a house, you have a contract with the buyer and the man who buys, and all this is registered in big books, and you must have lots of copies of that for the buyer, for all the people interested in that, and all this was written on a large sheet of paper. And I remember my mother and I was the eldest, I was 10 at that time, 9, 10, yes. I was the only one who could write. We spent hours at night copying the acts, you see, copying for something like a dime a page, a huge page. It was not A4, it's a huge page. That's how we managed to survive. So, why do I say this? I say this because we were saved by the coming of the Americans. When the Americans came in 1942, they landed in North Africa in November 1942, and they came to Tlemcen about 2 or 3 weeks later. I had been turned out of school because of the law of the Vichy government. I'll come back to this later on, but since I'm on that subject, I'm going to finish it. So I was out of school, and I had learned in the first form a few words of English. So when I saw the American soldiers around us, I went to them and talked to them, etc. And I was probably very cute at that time. And there was 2 military police who took me with them. They took me on their jeep, and they said, "You're going to come with us and show us around, etc." So they even gave me a cap, an American cap, and I went with them, going around the place, telling them which restaurant you could go to, even going to restaurants with them. They were advised not to eat everything. They usually asked for eggs, fried eggs, and what else? No drink, Moscatel, that was all. They couldn't eat anything else. And once they asked me, they say, you know, the military police had shirts, they had no coats. They had shirts, and at the back of the shirt, 3, what do you call that, the pleats? Creases. Creases. Yes, 3 equidistant creases. Must be like that. And they said, where can we have our laundry? I didn't know. There was no place there. There was no place. I said, give them. My mother is going to do it. And I took the shirts to my mother, and she did it. And they were satisfied. Oh my, it's perfect. So they sent us their shirts, and then they sent us all their laundry. And from all over the place, they came round. So in our small place, we lived, I told you, in that house, and to show that we were really poor, we lived on the ground floor. That was the cheapest apartment, and we had 3 rooms. We lived on the ground floor, and then all our neighbors were astonished to see trucks coming with bags of laundries, piles of bags of laundry. And of course my mother couldn't do it by herself, so we asked the neighbors to help us. And even we asked I had an aunt in Rolizane, 70 miles from our place. She came to live with us and work, and at that time there was no washing machine. And a bucket, a large bucket, and energy. And that's how we managed to survive. Because apart from the little money we earned from that, they brought us food. They brought us cheese. They brought us marmalade, chocolate, things like that. In those days, you had to have coupons for food. For each family had a sheet of coupons, and you were allowed one coupon a day, one coupon for bread, one coupon for meat, etc. And for bread, we had for the 4 of us. And you know that when you're young, you want to eat. You have a good appetite. We had a small bread like this. You know that in France we eat a lot of bread, one bread. By midday, it was gone. By midday, it was gone. What do you do in the afternoon and in the evening? So you know what my mother did? She had a lot of linen. You know what a trousseau is? When a girl got married, she had to have a plentiful trousseau with lots of sheets and towels and all sort of linen. And she had a lot of them. And there was an Arab lady who came to see us, and we had exchanges. She gave us flour. She had flour, I don't know where from. And my mother gave her a piece of linen, a sheet or a towel or whatever. See, this is how we managed to survive. One of the consequences of the war for us, it wasn't exactly the war, in fact. It was a consequence of the government of Vichy. The government of Vichy in 1940, in October 1940, took a law forbidding Jews to have a certain number of professions: doctors, barristers, members of this or that council, etc. This was part of the law. Second part of the law was that the number of Jewish students, the university, in primary and secondary schools, must be limited to 40% of the population of the university or the school. How do you choose those 14%? 14%. There was a hierarchy. First, the sons of soldiers who had fought during the First World War. Not only who had fought, but who had won a medal, médaille militaire first. The next step, those who had the Croix de Guerre, the War Cross. Third step, those who have the carte de combattant. You see, so there was a scale. The first year, that is 41, 42, I was maintained at school because my father was an ancien combattant. And I was among the 14%, so I stayed on. And it was terrible. I'll speak of that later on. Or I can't speak of it now. Because being, yes?
Yeah, speaking it now. Yeah.
Wait, every afternoon we had sports. And what kind of sport? It had to be on the border, you see, quite dangerous. For instance, we had to walk on top of a wall with 10 feet down on each side, you see, in a space which was about half a yard large, you see, and walk there. Or then you had the parcours du combattant. That is sort of, yes, that is the sort of exercise that the Marines have. You walk under bribed wires, then dive into a big hole, and then walk under. What was I have a remembrance of it. I was terrible. I was scared to death, and we even had to. Tlemcen is built on a slope, a gentle slope, and there was the railway line at bottom of that slope, and above the railway line there was sort of a metal one, and we had to walk on that, whereas the railway line was down below. So it wasn't pleasant at all. I myself thought it was a real waste of time. And coming back from the stadium where we had those exercises, we had to learn songs. Just like German songs, see, it was very unpleasant. Okay. And that was in 41, 42. And at the beginning of the school year in 42, October 42, they reduced the percentage. From 14%, it came down to 7%. And that was, at 7%, I was expelled. I didn't have the right to stay there. And this is, it was just a few weeks before the landing of the American soldiers in North Africa. For a few weeks, we went to what we called l'école juive, which was not an école juive at all. We had courses given by professional teachers, they had diplomas. Some of them were students, some of them had already been teachers, but they had been turned out of their schools themselves. So they received us in their own home. Generally it was in the dining room around the dining room table. We were, in my form, we were 4 or 3 or 4. And it lasted until the beginning of November or December, because most of our teachers were at that time enlisted, and they were sent to the camp of Bedeau.
What is the camp?
Bedeau is an out-of-the-way place. It is, you know that I spoke before of Sidi Bel Abbès, where my parents stayed for a time. Sidi Bel Abbès is known, or was known in Algeria at that time, because it was the siege of the Légion étrangère, the Foreign Legion. The Foreign Legion is something specific to the French. Is an army composed of foreign soldiers, who wish to be rehabilitated in some way, and they engage in this army. And south of Sidi Bel Abbès, about 30 kilometers from Sidi Bel Abbès, perhaps a bit more, they had a place, sort of fort, where some groups of the foreign legions had special tasks, especially pick Alpha. You know Alpha? Alpha is sort of straw which grows in very arid countries, and with which you can make all sorts of things, baskets, carpets, etc. You see, it's very, very difficult to the crops of well, to cut, because I'm moving. You see, when you try to draw those, je sais pas comment dire.
Bon, c'est plutôt Bedeau.
Non, mais pour dire, parler de Bedeau, c'est pour dire qu'il y avait rien à faire de particulier, sinon à récolter cet alpha.
Okay.
Récolter l'alpha, il fallait tirer, et en tirant, on se coupait les doigts, parce que c'est très coupant, c'est très fin, c'est comme des fils, qu'on arrache comme ça. Dans mon livre, j'ai montré à quoi ça ressemble. Bref, on a mis tous ces jeunes gens qui avaient entre 18 et 35 ans dans un camp qu'on a construit pour eux. C'était des tentes en toile, hein, qu'on appelle des marabouts, parce qu'ils ont cette forme-là. Alors, ils ont été tous regroupés là. Quelquefois, ils ne faisaient rien du tout, sinon transporter des pierres d'un endroit à l'autre. Voilà. Et, bon, la discipline était très rigoureuse. C'était des gens de la Légion étrangère qui étaient, pour bon nombre d'entre eux, en tout cas, très antisémites. La nourriture est très défectueuse. Alors, souvent, ils recevaient des colis. Ils recevaient des colis de leur famille. Mais j'ai une anecdote à vous dire. Un jour, une charrette avec des colis traversait le camp, et le commandant du camp a dit aux soldats qui étaient autour, les soldats juifs naturellement, vous voyez ces colis, ils sont pour vous, mais vous ne les aurez pas. Hein, c'est pour te dire un petit peu l'atmosphère générale. Eh bien, ces jeunes gens sont restés là, dans ce camp, maltraités, mal nourris, méprisés, alors que les Américains étaient déjà en Algérie. Hein. Les Américains étaient là au mois de novembre, et eux, on était envoyés dans ces camps à partir de la fin novembre et au mois de décembre. Et ils sont restés là jusqu'au mois d'avril, tout le long, sans rien, sans aucune protection. Alors que les Américains étaient venus pour justement restaurer la démocratie dans ces pays. Yes, the episodes I'm going to speak about takes place in November, late in November or the beginning of December 1942. Let's keep in mind that the Americans landed in North Africa in November 8th, 1942. So the Americans were there. It was decided by the government of that time that the Jewish young men from 18 to 35 should be gathered in a camp at Bedeau, south of Sidi Bel Abbès, the seat of the Foreign Legion. Bedeau, small village where there was a fort and where the soldiers from the Foreign Legion had a sort of training camp when they were sent there to train. But the fort was quite small, so for the young Jewish the Jewish young men who were sent to Bedeau, they built a camp with tents, marabout. There were, I think, something like 10 people under each tent, without any lighting or any comfort. They had to sleep on the ground, etc., etc. The job they had, in fact, that camp existed before. They had sent people, especially those people who had been turned out of their position because they were Jews or because they were not, they didn't approve of the government of the time. So those people had been sent there, but they had at that time, they had a special job to do. They had to cut wood, trees, etc. But the number of young men who were sent to Bedeau in November 42 was much bigger, and they had nothing special to do except to move stones from one place to another, or to load trains with bundles of alpha. But apart from that, there was no facility for washing. There were only a few number of taps along sort of what you can call it, a sort of
A pipe? Pipe?
No, there were pipes, yes, a long pipe with taps and nothing under, you see. No toilets, for instance. They had no toilets. They had to make it, yeah. Very, very terrible conditions of living. And apart from that, they had to suffer from the insults, the abuse of soldiers who looked after them, who were around them. Some of them were of German or Austrian origin. That means that they probably had anti-Semite feelings for them. And this situation stayed on until May 1943, when most of them were sent to Morocco to be trained before the expedition of the French forces to Italy, to the south of France and Italy. And then they took part in the French, what we call La Campagne de France, which took the French army from the south of France, Fréjus, to Alsace, and later on to Germany. They took part in the liberation of France from German soldiers. But before that, they spent those more than 6 months in terrible conditions in Bedeau. Right.
When were the Jews given their citizenship back?
In 1943, about that time, the same time. It's also at that time that we went back to school.
Can you say that again and paraphrase it? Sorry. When the Jews got their citizenship back?
Yes, I don't have the precise date, but I think that the Jews recovered their French citizenship in the course of April or July 1943.
At that time, what was the feeling towards the French?
I want to mention that it is also at that time in April 1943 that the students who had been expelled from public school were allowed to return to their school. And that's what I did in April or May, I don't remember exactly, 1943. Well, when we arrived, I can only speak of my own point of view. I was only 14 at that time. At the beginning, the other pupils of our schools didn't seem to like our return. They had excuses, if I may say so, because generally the forms, in each form there were more than 35 pupils. And I remember that in the form I was in, there wasn't even enough seats for everybody, so that we had to sit on the ground, you see. And well, I can understand that the other pupils were not very happy about that. But little by little, I think things improved. And with the landing of the American and the Allied forces in Normandy the following year, well, people came to realize that things were really changing. So even if they had evil feelings against us, they didn't show it. They tried to show, on the contrary, that we were still good friends. Well, I just said that we still had confidence in the French, but I can temper this and say that it was moderately, at least for the French living in Algeria. Because 2 years later, 3 years later, when my friends and myself had to choose the university where we were going to, we didn't choose the University of Algiers, because the University of Algiers was famed for its anti-Semitism. The board of students, the council of students of the University of Algiers, the president of that association of students, was the first to write to Maréchal Pétain after he voted that he decided the Statut des Juifs. In the Statut des Juifs, it was mentioned that only 3% of the students would be Jewish. Well, only 3% were allowed to be students at the universities, in universities. In France, here, it meant nothing. But 3% in Algeria, it means a lot. It means that lots of them will be turned out. And that president of students, of the council of students, immediately sent a telegram, a wire to Maréchal Pétain. Not 3%, but 0%. See? That was the atmosphere like. So this is why, when we came to the age of going to the university, none of them wanted to go to the University of Algiers. Because even before the war, in the 1930s, when there was the Front Populaire, the leftist parties, I was told by friends later on that there were real battles between the Jews, the Jewish students, and the others, you see. So in 1947, when I decided to go to the university, I chose Toulouse, which is across the Mediterranean, instead of going to Algiers, which was only 400 miles from our place. The parents didn't want the girls to go away from home. This is why Janine went to Algiers. But boys, usually, well, in my among my friends, well, none of them went to the University of Algiers. All of them went to Toulouse or Montpellier or even to Paris, but not Algiers. This is to show that our confidence in the French was limited.
When did you first notice the first whispers of an Algerian independence movement or some sort of breaking out?
I can tell you. We were married in July 1954. In the meantime, I had, to become a teacher, you've got to have a special diploma, which is valid all in France and in all the countries belonging to France. And I had to take the oral exam in Paris just after our wedding. I was asked to go to Paris to have this exam. I remember it was on the 18th of July, and we got married on the 14th of July, 15th of July, you see. So as soon as we got married, we went to Paris. I took that exam, and fortunately I passed it. And as a consequence, I had to stay, to have a stage of 12 months or school year in Algiers. So we moved to Algiers at the beginning of 1954. In those days, the university year began in November, you see. We arrived in Algiers on the 30th of October 1954. We stayed in a hotel, and the following morning, November the 1st, I went out to buy croissant, and I saw the papers. It was the assassination of a schoolmaster somewhere in Constantinois, and it was the first act of the independence war against France. So in Algiers, everything was the same as usual. We had lots of problems, difficulties to find an apartment. Well, still, we spent the year very quietly. It was pleasant. Algiers, beautiful city, and everything went as usual. So that the following year, when I had to express a wish for the city where I would like to be appointed, I said Algiers. Well, somebody, I don't remember, the inspector offered Algiers. Would you be interested to be in Algiers? I said, why not? It's a beautiful city. I had never been in Algiers before. It was quite different from Tlemcen. Big, beautiful city, the sea, the beaches all around, etc. And that's how we came to Algiers. It was my first job in Algiers. But little by little, things got worse and worse. We had bombs everywhere, in cafes, in lamp posts too. Usually you had a bus stop and a lamp post nearby, and they put bombs at the lamp stops. In those days we didn't have a car. I didn't have a car. Eric was born in the preceding August, 1955. We managed to find a furnished apartment, and the first year, 55, 56, 56, I had not done my military service. You know that in France at that time, young people aged 21 must have at least 1 or 2 years of military service. I didn't have, I was spared that military service because I was the eldest orphan in the family. And at that time there had been a law for that too. Fortunately, I didn't have to do this military service, but still, as things were getting worse in Algeria, they formed territorial army. A territorial army, that is an army staying in the territory. And I was bound to do that. And one day I received an order asking me to go to that place, etc. And I don't remember exactly how often it was, but at least it was at least once a week, once a month. I had to spend 24 hours at the disposal of the local territorial army. Most of the time, what I had to do was to watch the passengers of buses. Well, I had a uniform just like every soldier. All soldiers have uniforms. I had a uniform. I had never worn that uniform before. But being on guard, as we said, I had to wear that uniform and to have a gun. I've never held a gun in my life. And I remember I even once brought that gun to our flat, to the flat where we were. And Eric was scared to see, he was already crawling on. Okay, so every passenger coming into the bus had to open his bag and show that there was no bomb in it. Sometime I had to go to the terminal of the bus, and the terminal of the bus was right in the middle of the Arab quarter, the Kasbah. See, at 6 o'clock in the morning, being there and ask people, well, I could have been shot easily without being able to do anything to protect myself. I had never held a gun before, you see, right. And it was very, very uncomfortable to see. I had to do that even with my own pupils, because the bus went round our school, the school where I taught, and I asked my own pupils to open their school bag. Imagine the reactions of the pupils. Have you seen Benhamou? He said, etc. Right. This is the ridiculous situation in which we were, with which we were confronted. And for a week, I remember, we had to watch the gas stations, see, and just outside Algiers there were huge what do you call that, cisterns of gas, and we stayed there at the foot of those beams to watch to watch that there were no terrorists behind. Once we spent a week in a camp where terrorists were imprisoned, and I stayed at night for 2 hours in a mirador. You know what a mirador is? It's a big tower, on top of which there very often there are projectors, lights to see that everything is quiet, just as in big prisons. You see, it's very, very, very uncomfortable. And with the things you could hear in the dining rooms, in the refectories where we had our meals, with all the people talking, it's because of the Jews. And Mendes France is a Jew, and that one is a Jew, and that other one is a Jew. You know that everything, the cause of everything is the Jews, see? And these were the people I was with. What do? You fight with them? That was the situation. And things went worse and worse, and you had De Gaulle coming in 1958, and this is where we hoped that things would be settled, that there would be peace sometime, and that's when we bought the apartment I was talking to you about the other day, you see? And that's when we went to the Habitat, and that's the terrorists followed us in the Habitat, and they planted bombs there, once on the first floor against the secretary and the secretary of the syndicate of teachers, and the second time was in April or March 1961, when a bomb was planted in front of the doorsteps of our neighbor, Jacques Benhamou, who was just above our apartment. And at that time he was the chief of the police of Algiers, and the bomb exploded in the afternoon, someday in March or April, no, in March probably, March 1961, was about 4:30, when Pierre-Yves had just finished his midday nap, and Janine washing him in the bathroom just behind the window. The window, it had a very big window pane, glass window pane, rectangular, about 2 feet, 3 feet high, 2 feet wide. When the bomb exploded, Pierre-Yves, who was about 10 months old, was lying on the table. When the bomb exploded, the window pane went down all of a piece, about 2 or 3 inches from Pierre-Yves' head. And of course, we all panicked, and that evening I wrote to the inspector I had met 3 or 4 weeks before to tell him that we could no longer bear that situation, and that we were in danger, that my child, my wife, my children were in danger, and therefore I asked him to move me to a school in France, and that's how we came to Grenoble. In July, we moved all our belongings and we sent them to the place where I was appointed, that is Grenoble. I had never been in Grenoble before. I didn't know the place at all. And when the ministry offered me that job, I said, okay, I prefer Grenoble to any other place because it's near the mountains, and my son will probably be better off in a region of mountains where the air is pure, etc., etc. Right. And Janine took the 2 children and went to her parents in Oran, while I came by myself here in Grenoble to try and find a place to live, an apartment or flat. And that's what I did. And I could tell you a few things about what happened. When I went to an agency to have a flat, I visited the flat. I said, the flat is okay, I'll have it. The price suited me. But when I gave my name, Benhamou, I saw that something went wrong. And immediately the secretary said, oh, I'm very sorry, but the apartment have already been acquired. And so I didn't have that flat. I had to choose another one. Okay. And I chose another one. And the lady who rented me that apartment said, okay, but you'll have to buy it. I rent it for 1 year, and if you don't buy it before, oh, all you people coming from Algeria, you're full of money. You're right. And in fact, the following year, I had to leave that apartment. It was in the middle of winter. There is a law in France that people can't be turned out of their flat if in winter. From I think there are dates from the 15th of December to the 15th of March. I didn't know that, and we obeyed. and we left the apartment. It was snowing. It was terrible conditions. That's how we were welcomed in France.
Can you tell us about your last day in Algeria? Your feelings? Were you sad or happy to leave? Your last view of the country?
In fact, I think it was a relief. I was sorry to leave my wife and my 2 children because they didn't come with me. But leaving Algiers was for me a relief. I must tell you that in the school I taught, there were other Jews with me. There was 1, 2, 3, 4 Jewish teachers. One of them was a communist, and I have never heard of him ever since. Well, some people have told me that he had been caught by the French forces, tortured, etc. I don't know. The others all emigrated to France. Before making that decision, we had several meetings. Of course, it wasn't, what shall we do? What are we going to do? We didn't want, I myself didn't want to go to Israel because I knew that the first step the new country of Algeria would take would be to be a member of the Arab League. And I knew that was not something would be good for us. And this is why I didn't want to. I would have chosen America if I hadn't had 2 young children. Just what my brother did, what Paul did. He went immediately from Algeria to America, to the United States. I would have done the same, because from 1942, I've always had a very, very, very good inkling for the United States. I know that they've saved us in 1942. I realize it. I've always realized it. I know that if they had not come at the time when they came, we probably would have been sent to a concentration camp. The yellow stars were already in stock in the town halls of Algeria. They already had stocks of those yellow stars. So we really have been saved by the Americans, and we have to be grateful for that. See, that's it never crossed my mind to go to Israel. There were too many difficulties at that time. Probably I would have preferred to go to the United States. Right, that's all.
Fast forward to today. How do you feel today about France or Israel or the US?
I'm very, very disappointed by the French. In the course of my activities, I've always been in very good terms with my colleagues, who mostly were not Jewish. I've had very good friends. I still have a good friend. But what has disappointed me a lot, is that I have never received from them any mention of the situation which is growing worse and worse here in France. I would have liked them to send me a note saying that they disapproved of this or that, and that they were sympathetic with us. But none of them has ever, except one, I must say, among quite a lot of them. And this dates back to the 1980s, when there were the feud between Arafat and the Israelis became worse and worse, you see. And going to work in the morning, I always heard so many Israelis have been murdered, etc., by this or that, and nobody said a word about it. I was offered very high position in the ministry. I didn't want. I refused, because in my mind I said, if anything goes wrong, it's because you're Jewish. They will find the cause in the fact that you're Jewish. So I stayed away. No. They wanted me to be their president in this or that. No, I don't want to.
Well, I do mean to kill us. 2 minutes left. Today, one son has emigrated to the U.S. One son is here in France. One of your sons is in the U.S. and one branch of families in the U.S. One son's here in France, but some of which are thinking, grandchildren are thinking of moving to Israel. What's your general sentiment on the future of Algerian Jewish and your family?
Well, I would advise young people to go to Israel now. Older people like me have to stay here. I think we have to stay here because Israel needs a strong diaspora. If there's no diaspora in France, France is going to turn, all the country is going to turn anti-Semite and anti-Israeli. So, in my opinion, I think we've got to do everything we can to maintain a united diaspora as strong as possible, to counterbalance the anti-Zionism and the anti-Semitism, which is permanent here in France. It is permanent. Sometimes it bursts out and sometimes it quietens a little.
Just to go back, just any last thoughts, any message to people, grandkids, great-grandkids, about the importance of Algeria, of this history?
Yes. Everything I've done ever since I've retired is precisely for you, for my grandchildren. This book is for you. All the albums you've seen, the photographs, etc. To remember what you come from, what we've gone through, and to give you courage to go on. We've got to go on. Okay. I'm sorry.
Merci. Je reconnais. Oui. Regarde, on a...
Finalement, on n'a pas...